Dr. Natasha Cica is director of Capacity.org, which works globally to help leaders, teams, and organizations deliver effective and sustainable change. She was recognized by the Australian Financial Review and Westpac Banking Group as one of Australia's 100 Women of Influence, and she's a professor at the Australian National University. Natasha has over 20 years' experience in professional training in Australia, Europe, and the Western Balkans. I had an opportunity to interview her and to ask questions about leadership, crisis management, and women in business. So, check it out and feel free to comment. Can you tell us a little bit about your career and professional path?
Well, my career started in law. I trained as a lawyer and I worked as a corporate lawyer and then a government lawyer. I actually advised the Australian Federal Parliament and specialised on immigration and national security and human rights questions.
It's quite popular.
It's very, very, very timely. You wait long enough and everything comes around again. And then I went to Europe and studied and worked. Wanted to come to Belgrade, but the war was on, so I went to Britain. And then I, bit by bit, became more interested in starting my own business and helping people work in situations of crisis and conflict and difficulty and challenge to develop practical solutions for that. So I've worked across media, I've worked with corporations, I've worked with government departments, I've worked with educators, all kinds of different people, but the thing that my career has in common now, I think everything I do is about helping individuals, teams and organisations make change happen. So change is my end point.
You mentioned Europe, so my next question is, in your opinion, what are the differences and similarities between European and Australian ways of leadership?
Oh, that's such a big question. And as we discovered tonight, it's quite difficult to simplify across cultures, but of course there are differences. Related to Europe being the old world and Australia being the new world. And so there are some differences in mentality, differences related to geographical position in the world, differences in terms of where we think our natural partners are. But in terms of, Europe is a big place as well as Snezana, so it's hard to answer that, especially as we're talking while the Brexit vote is happening. So I think that every place has a specific style relating to its leadership culture and its management culture and the way that different kinds of people, including men and women, engage. So I can't give you a simple answer. I hope that's not disappointing.
No, of course not. We will talk about that later. What are the most important decisions you make as a leader of your organization? When you talk about capacity.
Any person, I think that the most challenging issue facing any leader is the question of self-knowledge and self-management. So I think it is often very difficult and challenging for people in senior roles which have a lot of status and a lot of visibility, and where they're faced with an increasingly complex world with very difficult problems. It can be very difficult for them to look at themselves and figure out what their strengths but also their weaknesses are. So it can be difficult for them to be vulnerable to themselves and work with that as part of the matrix of things that they need to manage as a leader. And there are some very interesting differences as well in terms of how men and women approach that particular question.
What was the most challenging situation that you have experienced in your work? And how did you solve that?
The most challenging situation, I think for me the most challenging, there have been a lot of specific challenge in a range of workplaces that I've worked in. So for example, when I advisor to the Australian Parliament on national security questions. That was through a big, I think called the Tampa crisis, which was a boatload of refugees that was sort of barricaded, and then soon after that 9/11 happened. So in that workplace that was very challenging because none of us had ever experienced anything quite like that before. But for myself, the biggest challenge was when I decided to establish my own business. So that actually this business, which is my second business, but my business is called Capacity Org, and I realised I wanted a business which would enable me to work in Serbia, Australia, wherever my clients were, and nobody was going to hand that to me. So if I wanted that to happen, I had to change things in my life and take some risks and make some investment, not just financial investment, to see if I could make that dream happen.
Next question. How do you encourage creative thinking within your organization, and where do the great ideas come from in your organization?
Well, because my organisation is one that helps other organisations, I'm often in that situation where I'm working with individuals and teams who are somehow blocked around change, and I find creative method and a creative approach is the thing which gets them to unblock. So a lot of the work is actually, I often ask people to draw things, because sometimes people can't articulate something that they can draw it. In a lot of workshops I ask people to do private journaling, so writing about what their reactions are that nobody will see, so it's totally safe. And another very interesting trick that I'll now share with the world is often people will speak more comfortably through an object than in a more self-censored kind of way, a little bit like the way children will talk about how they feel through a teddy bear. So I often ask people to choose or deploy an object in the exercises I do with people. So for example, it might be this ring. And there's a whole story about this ring that I could tell you, and it would tell you something about me as a person that it would be more difficult for you to access unless we had the ring, because you can hold it and it frees people. So I have quite a few tricks like that. And because part of the process of getting people to move into a change is about their emotional and non-rational selves. It's not just an intellectual exercise. So for that reason as well, when people ask me, what's the particular theory we use, or which textbooks or which articles work, my answer is all and none.
What is the one mistake you witness leaders making more frequently than others?
I think the biggest mistakes relate to ego, which comes back to the question you asked earlier. I think that often people in leadership roles, especially ones that are high status and visible, are frightened to admit that there are things that they don't know and that there are things which are beyond their control. They're frightened that they will look weak, they're frightened they'll look insecure, and especially in the world that we live in now where everything is monitored 24/7 by social media or whatever. So a small mistake can turn into a big public relations and confidence crisis for people. So I do think questions around ego, self-esteem, communication skills, engagement, and the practice we all need to do to become more accomplished and elegant and effective in those fields is very important work in the leadership space.
Okay. What is one characteristic that you believe every leader should possess?
It's connected with the answer I gave earlier about self-knowledge. So the starting point for every leader is to know him or herself. And if you drill down further into that, I think the next stage of very interesting questions is what are the values that motivate me towards success, towards achievement, but also in terms of how I treat people along the way. And more, I'm very interested in using quite old-fashioned language around that, specifically the language of virtue. So those old-fashioned things that are about what kind of character someone has. Do they have courage? Are they honest? Are they kind? Are they responsible? Are they trustworthy? So I'm starting to do some very interesting work with a colleague in London called Alex Cameron around that. And we'll be starting a new conversation to open a space where people in leadership roles who feel that things aren't quite working and they don't know where to find the answers can come to drill down into these questions.
Nice. What advice would you give someone who's going into a crisis manager position for the first time?
The first piece of advice is to, before you enter, work out where your support lies. Because one of the things that defines a crisis situation is we become reactive and defensive and stop. We lose the opportunity and the luxury, if you like, to pause and reflect before we react. And if we're in that situation alone, we can be quite exposed to make the wrong decision. So I believe it's very important to know who you can go to and what you can draw upon before you're in that very difficult situation.
If you could travel back in time and speak with your younger self,
Yes.
what would you encourage your younger self to change, alter, or focus on more? Would you do anything different?
Well, of course we all would, because of course, when in the presentation today I talked about the front garden and the back garden. So you get to a stage in life where you've achieved a lot of things and you've done a lot of things and met a lot of people and had a lot of experiences that actually look really good, and you put them in the front garden with the roses and the trees, and that's the front piece, if you like, for the story about your life. And it's not just to do with career, it's to do with family, it's to do with friendships and whatever. But along the way in life, things go wrong. And so if you invite people into the front garden and then into your house as your guest, eventually you know people enough and they come to the back garden, and that's where the secrets are, that's where the things that have gone wrong, and things go wrong in people or everyone's lives, sometimes for reasons completely beyond our control and otherwise not. So I'm not going to tell everyone what's in my back garden, but it's definitely there, because at a certain age I've had some things go very wrong, and my best hope is that I would have learnt from them. So if I were to talk to my younger self, I would say some things will go wrong. Nobody is safe from it. You will make some mistakes, but that's normal, and you should learn from those mistakes the best that you can. So it would be a lesson about wisdom and accepting that we don't always have as much control over things as we would wish.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.